Good evening.
Servus.
Hey.
Servus. Hey. Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi. So still.
Hi, Markus.
Hey, there's still more people coming. Let's wait like a minute, maybe. Well, there's somebody who has some background talking or TV or something. Let's just make sure that you mute yourself when you're not talking. Great. I guess there, another 5 people or so may show up in the next few minutes, but let's just start. Hey, so good to see you again. Like probably not all of you are the same people that were at the last meeting, and I just realized it's been almost 6 months, and it's really it's interesting. Like when I'm talking about like the making of Tentacles, obviously there's a lot involved. And so like the way that I'm approaching these meetings is to kind of come up with an idea, like what do I want to do, and only then do I start thinking about it, right? Like what does it really mean, how far back does it go, and as always I want to do this in a more interactive fashion, also because I know most of you and I feel like you're friends and family, right? So it's important to me that you kind of like always ask questions, or even here at the beginning you kind of like start telling me what you're interested in, sort of something that I can use as a starting point or something that I can make sure I'm going to get to, right? Because there's so much to talk about and there's so much to show where I'm like not even sure if I should show you that much, as much as I have in my head right now. So anyway, so have you all heard the Tentacles album? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, what's your impression? So maybe a couple of you want to just give me some feedback on it. Jerry, come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've listened to it a number of times. Yeah. Thanks. And I really like it a lot. I noticed that it moved a little away from the prog noir, where there's a little bit more song structure there and vocals, and that was I like that move. And to me, it was like I really appreciated that. I think there's a lot of tension in all the songs except the Saudi Day, which I love the pun of that. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think it's just amazing that it came together so quickly, and it's just a welcome. To me, it was really welcome after the 5 years, I think, since or 6 years since the last
6, yeah.
album. I know, of course, there's like there's a South America tour box set and things like that too, but it was welcome to have new material, and that's one of the things that I enjoy. I mean, I always like having an occasional Crimson song, but more Stickman material is great for the live gigs, and that's exciting to see music that was just produced to be out there. So that's I really enjoy it. It's just right up my alley for what I enjoy with music.
Great. Yeah, you're hitting on a very important point. There is the fact that there hasn't been new music for 6 years, which I think is really a key topic to talk about. Like why, right? Like how did that happen? How did like our creativity get stifled somehow? Which I think it did, right? Like and as I said, I've only just started thinking about these things, so you'll get very fresh thoughts from me tonight. Very fresh thoughts. Yeah. Like some more observations about the music, Hacksaw. You can't hear you. Your microphone is off.
Sorry, I haven't had a chance to listen to it, even though I have it, because I got it when I saw you last. But my CD player is not currently doing the right thing, and so I have to fix that stuff so that I can even listen to it. So what I know of the album is What You Play at Concert, which I liked a lot. I thought it was different. and very, very interesting. It was my impression of the time was that it was more not it wasn't as angular. It was a little bit softer, but still very much you guys. So
Interesting. That's interesting because I heard some other people say the opposite about it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the opposite as well.
huh.
It was it definitely seems to me a lot more progressive than the previous album. Not that the previous album wasn't progressive, but this one like seemed like it would take a long time to learn how to play. Yeah, I was a big fan. It reminded me more of Crimson than rock noir, which isn't a bad thing in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, like, where should I start? I mean, like, there's, we have this like small circle of people here, so I'm gonna be like totally honest, right? So something really life-changing happened for me when I joined Stickman, and some of you know that it was, I'd already been working with Pat for 5 years, and Stickman already had existed for like maybe 2 years, 1.5 or 2 years with Michael Bernier, and I had seen them, and I really didn't enjoy the band, and it was really when Pat asked me to join, I really had to think about it, right? So because I mean I knew that I was going to say yes, but there was something that I needed to sleep on to kind of like make up my mind to decide that I want to go in that direction, that I want to go and kind of like, because I knew there was going to be good sides and bad sides to it, and a lot of good sides, obviously, right? So when I joined Stickman, that was in like when we first met, that was in September 2010, and in 2011 we played our first tour, which was actually in South America. Started in Tucumán in Argentina, north of Argentina. That was my very first big show, and so I was kind of like thrown into that situation, and my role at that point, at least how I saw it, like how I wanted it to be, is I wanted to be super supportive as a sideman, so that Pat and Tony could actually be the stars that they are, right? And that was like the one thing that I was missing when Michael was playing with them. It was a little bit as if there was like it wasn't like a support system. The band wasn't a support system. That's kind of like what it felt like to me. So I approached this whole thing from the perspective of like, I want to be there and I want to do a great job so that they can be who they are. And for the first few years, that was like really obvious that kind of like worked also, because like, and from your perspective that may be different, but from the perspective of this, being on stage, I could see that everybody was looking at Tony, not even at Pat, right? So it's kind of like a thing of like the attention that the audience gives, and like who's kind of like the stage presence, who are people kind of like focused on to. So, but that's just like let's keep that in mind, because that may be important also for the story. But what actually happened, which was kind of like super unexpected, 2011 was the 30th, or was it the 20th? I can't really 20th anniversary of Discipline, of the album. Was it? I'm not good. It was the 30th, right? Like the 30th anniversary of the Discipline album, and Robert Fripp was retired at that point. There was like even like a big article in the Financial Times that he had retired and was not going to return to music and stuff. And then Adrian approached Robert and asked if they wanted to do like an anniversary tour for Discipline. Right? That was in 2011, and and Robert said no, and that's when and how the Crimson Project was born. And it wasn't called Crimson Project at the beginning. It was called Tour for Perfect Trio, and we played a 42 dates tour in the US in, I think, October 2011. So it was still the same year, like that same year when I started touring with Stickman and when I first started touring internationally on that level. And it was kind of like a very interesting thing. Like it, from the very beginning, it wasn't totally obvious to me that it wasn't going to go anywhere, right? Like that there wasn't going to be new music or something. Like I still have music that I've written for the 6-piece band, which was never rehearsed or recorded. And so anyway, like the story, kind of like the story with the Crimson Project, which was touring in parallel to Stickman, and during, you know, in the Crimson Project shows, we were playing as Stickman as well, and so it was really like an interesting time. We had done the Absalom EP, we had done the Deep album, and really in 2014 we played a long European tour. And also I think Australia with the Crimson Project, and Robert Fripp had seen the Crimson Project in London, and for some reason he didn't like it, which is fine by me. You know, I would feel very strange, you know, seeing my music performed by somebody else other than me, if I'm still, you know, like emotionally engaged with it, which apparently he was. And so like my kind of like the way that I see this is that somehow the Crimson Project actually inspired King Crimson to come back, which is a good thing. It's a very good thing. However, because there was the argument, or let's say like the not so nice situation that happened between Adrian and Robert, or Robert and Adrian, because Robert didn't want Adrian in the new band, Tony kind of like had to make a call. Like, so it really was Tony who said that we can't continue playing with Adrian. Not because he didn't want to, but because of political reasons, just to kind of like keep things a little bit safer, you know, for them. And so like, why am I telling you all of this? I think all of this story has a big influence to how the history of Stickman had evolved, right? So it was the Prog Noir record that we started making after it was clear to me that Pat and Tony had gone off to play with their band again. So that meant, like, from going something like the trio Stickman, that was a focus for like 3 years, I went to being in a band where the other two members were basically in a bigger and better band, and they were touring a lot, right? So, and for me as a professional musician, where I have to kind of like make sure that like my portfolio of work kind of like brings in enough income, that was a little bit of a shock, right? As you can see. So the Prog Noir album was the album where I still had the energy and the motivation to write and to work on Stickman music. Right? Like it was like the shock, or like the realization, like what I had lost in terms of opportunity because King Crimson had come back, kind of like wasn't, you know, I'm pretty good at swallowing things, let's say, like, you know, for a couple of years, but then eventually it hits me, right? And so this is how I think it happened, right? So Prog Noir still came out great somehow, and like there was sort of like a vision behind the album, and Tony was visiting me, I was visiting him. It was very much like a group effort, even though like the tours we were doing, that we could only do them when Crimson wasn't touring, so there was a lot of back and forth. And with a band that big, like I already knew, say in 2015, I already knew that in 2016 I'm only going to work with Stickman like for 2 weeks in August or something like that, right? So Prog Noir came out, and somehow I got a little bit disillusioned with the whole thing, like just some sort of burnout, some sort of um, yeah, kind of like not knowing how much. Well, not I knew that I should have always kept investing into the band, and I did with playing those live shows, but somehow it got really difficult for me to be the driving force on so many levels of the band, right? So I was responsible, like, let's say, for part of the artistic management, let's say, like not talking about like the booking and stuff or other things, but and the artistic plan, like the corporate identity, like coming up with ideas for products. Like I was like the product manager, and I was a player in the band, and one of the basically the main writer at that time. Really, like on Prog Noir, Tony brought in like some ideas, but most things kind of came from me, and so really, when Leonardo Pavkovic came up with the idea to do these Stickman Plus shows, which then we started doing. First one was with, actually the first one of that kind was with Eddie Jobson, who joined us on the Cruise to the Edge for a show. And then like there was the idea, this is something I don't think I've ever told anybody, there was the idea to go on, like Eddie asked Stickman to go on the road with him to play the whole King Crimson Red album with him, which was sort of like his idea for a concept for a show, which we declined. I don't remember why. But anyway, so then it turned out that David Cross came into the equation, and then we played Japanese shows with David. Later on, we played in South and Central America, and also in Mexico. And so there was shows with Mel Collins, Gary Husband. Also, like something that people forget, like in 2012, Stickman played with Terry Bozzio. We played a couple of shows with Terry Bozzio, which was, before we had this idea to invite others into the band, right? So anyway, so basically, and you already know like what I'm gonna say now. So because King Crimson was active, no writing happened. After Prog Noir, no writing happened for Stickman. As simple as that. It would have happened if I had done it, if I had written the music. And now the funny thing is, like, I keep asking myself, did I really have writer's block? No, I didn't have writer's block because I still had ideas. Like I had a lot of ideas, and I still have a lot of ideas for pieces for Stickman. But I was just frustrated with the situation. Like, and it's I'm sharing this with you, right? I'm not sharing this with everybody. Like, and this video is not gonna go public, right? So it was really hard for me, and I'm sharing this because like this is something that everybody kind of like runs into, like disappointment. Even though Pat and Tony never wanted to disappoint me, right? It was just the way that the my life or their life got structured by circumstances, right? So so really when we played the show with Gary Husband in Japan, that became the Owari record. I was staying in Tokyo with Gary and Leonardo for a few more days, and we recorded the music of our Times album. And what already in the city of Tokyo, you could see like something is really wrong. Like this pandemic is real. Like the streets were empty already, and like I remember that usually going from Roppongi in Tokyo to Narita Airport, takes 50 minutes or something. And when they took me there on that Wednesday in was it early March or early April? I don't remember now. Like the drive took 20 minutes, right? And at the airport, I maybe saw 15 people from the entrance of the building to the gate and stuff like that. So you can see like that kind of like, and because I guess like I'm kind of intuitive, but also like I guess intelligent in that way. I realized, okay, this is gonna last. And you know, I was flying through Helsinki. In Helsinki, the airport was full. Everybody was just acting as if nothing was going on. And I knew, okay, this is already here. This is going to last a long time. A lot of people will die, and blah blah blah. And so I flicked a switch, and I completely went into emergency mode. And some of you will remember when I started like first kind of like events like this, and I asked people online for jobs, mastering jobs, production jobs. I did the teaching thing and everything. So as you can see, like, so even though at that point when Stickman had stopped playing and I knew, okay, we're gonna have a break, it wasn't as if I could just kind of like change gears and get into a creative mode to start writing music for the band. You know, I was hoping, like I was still kind of like telling me this lie at that point that I can just kind of like be the professional who is always creative. But now this is the interesting thing. I was always creative, and I'm always creative. But there was the part of me that the actionist, you know, the part that does things, which really couldn't do anything, and that lasted till I don't know the exact date, but it was lasted until mid-January of this year. I looked it up, like the first, well, you know, I'm skipping a lot here, but anyway, like, so I didn't manage to actually send a musical idea to Pat and Tony. So in the end, it was Tony who gathered all the strength to come up with something. And the very first thing he sent us was on December 27th last year. It was Danger in the Workplace. That piece, like he sent us his part for that piece on December 27th. So Christine, please ask. I'm not reading the chat, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My question was, you said you didn't write anything, you focus more on the podcast and so on, but you also continue to make music. You have multiple projects, and one of them was True Stew that came in the summer. So how do you balance that out? It's not like you stopped creating.
Yeah, but there was no writing.
Ah, okay. It was,
So
okay.
and even the improvised projects were very, very hard to do, right? And
Okay.
I know, and I know that like some of, for example, the Anchor and Burden solo album I did, it kind of sounds like it's composed, because obviously when I improvise I do compose, right? But I have to force myself into that situation to even record myself. Right, so for example, I don't have a fixed recording setup. I don't have a desk that I sit, that I sit on and everything's there and I just plug in and I start recording. No, like my whole idea about musical creativity is that everything's modular, and I'm always keeping these moving elements, because I don't even want to know right now which pieces of gear I'm going to use tomorrow. Maybe, right? Like I want to just grab it from a box and then use it, and so you can see that didn't help, right? There's this way that I'm actually working creatively and musically was in the way of me actually doing a good job coming up or writing down or actually like recording musical ideas. So, and I think because of the way that I had acted within Stickman as sort of like the guy who does things, who gets the ball rolling, who starts things, who has the vision and stuff like that. I guess, and I don't know that for sure, but certainly Tony was kind of like waiting for me to do the initial, to have the initial idea, to take the initial step. So I was really, really happy when I realized that he had realized that I'm not capable of doing that this time. So, and that was, like I said, late December last year. Tony sent the first idea, and then within even the first 3 days or so, he sent maybe six to nine ideas, maybe, some of which really was just like one bar or one phrase of something, or like in the case of Danger in the Workplace, it was actually his part that you're still hearing on the record, right, unchanged. Well, maybe a few things got changed, but not much. And yeah, that's basically kind of like, you know, up to that point. But then, like, you would say, okay, so now Tony's sending something. Pat is always very good at just kind of like reacting to stuff. So once he had something from Tony, and I still felt so low I couldn't do anything. Pat had already, I just looked it up, like Pat had already sent 6 versions or 6 drum takes that he did before I even kind of like felt like, oh, Markus, like now you need to sit down and really do something, right? Like, and I also knew when the tour was going to start and everything. So there was a lot of pressure. So what I did is a big part of the block that I had at that point was I didn't really want to pick up my instrument. Right? I was picking it up to practice, and that felt fine. But I didn't really want to play music on it. And I mean, all of this may sound super strange to some of you, but it's true. It's true, right? So what I did, I actually ordered a MIDI keyboard. It's over there. I don't need to show it to you. I ordered a MIDI keyboard, and that kind of like was the lifesaver, because what I started doing, I started playing along to Tony's ideas and to Pat's ideas on the keyboard, which is really like interesting in hindsight, because even the piece which is now called Company of Ghosts, right, is one that I have written on the keyboard. Everything, like the whole touch guitar part, is written on the keyboard. And when I say written, it's not really written; it's kind of reacted to, right? So for this particular work, for this EP, I did not want to think about what Tony had did. I didn't even want to analyze. I didn't even want to know if it's in the key of G or A flat or whatever. I just put my hands on the keyboard and I just played along, and I came up with these melodies. And they are also like quite chromatic and quite like strange in a way. Somehow because I just left things, I don't know, like it was more about the reaction to, right? The reaction to the sound. And with a Company of Ghosts, like the A section, for example, it's a strange form where like every 8th bar there is a 5/4 rather than a 4/4, and stuff that I really didn't understand when I was listening to it, because like in some sessions that Tony sent me, he put time signatures in, and in this one for some reason they were like totally not matching up with what I was hearing, which was interesting. So that's why these parts, and especially like if you want to listen to that later, the intro of Company of Ghosts really starts on either B2 and of measure 7 or something like that. Like it's really crazy, and it made it really difficult for me to learn the pieces later on when we wanted to play them live, because like Tony's and Pat's one was in a completely different place. So I had to relearn and to hear the pieces differently. But anyway, so the keyboard kind of like was the lifesaver, right? And but then I still realized, okay, I've only worked on one piece, but we need, I don't know, 5 or 6 for an EP. So what I started doing is like I knew, okay, like I'm not gonna get much done unless I really dedicate a chunk of time to this. And then I asked a friend of mine who's renting an apartment in an old German castle in the middle of nowhere, and I asked her, can I be there for a couple of weeks and just be alone? And believe it or not, like I went there and I was alone. Like I didn't see a soul. I just went to the supermarket twice, right? I didn't see a soul for 2 weeks, and I was working on the music for the EP. But then, and this is where it like so interesting, the block still continued, right? It was still that I wasn't able to concentrate on it like for, say, like work on a piece for a couple hours. No, it was still like piecemeal, right? Just a little bit there, a little bit there, maybe one measure here, one measure there, jumping around between the pieces. And I don't know, like who, Jerry, did you mention Satide, right? That piece, for
Yes.
example, that was one that was the first one that I actually composed on the guitar again.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting there and the way that I kind of like see my any musical contribution that I'm making is that I want to transform what is already there. Yeah, if that makes sense, right? Like I want my contribution to turn this thing into something else, and especially with Stickman, it's to me it's very important that the three of us, each of us, has a distinct part to play. So for me, it was never an option just to say to double one of Tony's parts. So even though, like in a piece like Danger in the Workplace, for example, like he already had the riff, he already had the theme for a couple of sections, but I just like, I just wanted to put something on top. And so with Satide, for example, what happened that, this cheesy wordplay like of Sati, because it's kind of like sounded like Sati when it was only Tony's part. But when I added my melody and I realized it's the kind of, writing that Stravinsky would have done, like melodically, I started calling it Stravinsky Day, which Tony didn't like. But anyway, we kept Sati Day for that. But you see, it was really so even those 2 weeks at home, they weren't not at home in that castle, weren't enough. So the next step I did, like on this quest, like for the Tentacles EP, I actually started renting a room, which is about a 5-minute walk away from my house, so that I could go here in the night and sit down and work. And that was really like eventually, like this was where the EP was completed, right? So, and like some of you know that there was this faux pas happening at the end of the process. Like it was a Sunday night, and I was recording till about 3 in the morning, and I had to go teach at 9 in the morning. So I didn't back up my laptop. I took my laptop to school. School was canceled because the AC in the building didn't work and we weren't allowed in because of COVID. And so I went home. I was very tired. I left my laptop in my backpack on the tram, and it was gone. It was gone. It was so incredibly shocking. So I already knew, like, okay, everything that Pat and Tony had recorded, I can get it back, right? I can get it back. But my stuff was gone, everything. I had some mix downs, so I could kind of like recreate the parts, at which I then, on that Monday, I started doing that. So I worked for like a couple, 3 days to gather all the data from Pat and Tony again. I set up all the sessions again. I started recording, and like the one piece that I completely re-recorded was Company of Ghosts, actually. And like in the company that runs the tram service, they have sort of like an online form where you can report lost items. So obviously that was one of the first things I did. Actually my friend and business partner Bernhard did that for me on that Monday morning, because I was so shocked I was sort of paralyzed. So he did that for me, and on the Thursday morning, after the Monday that I lost it, I got an email in my inbox at 8:30 in the morning that said, "We may have found your backpack." And 5 minutes later, I got another email which said, "We have found your backpack." So they must have looked into it and seen that the contents fitted with my description. So anyway, like an hour later, I had my laptop back, and it was like as you know, can imagine, total relief, because on the weekend after that Thursday, I was supposed to deliver the files to the mix engineer, right? So everything kind of like worked out fine in the end, and that was really like 2 weeks before the tour started. So I delivered the mixes to Benny Schäfer in Hanover, which is
Marcus,
yes.
did you use any of the music that you created during those 3 days where you weren't sure that you're going to get the laptop back?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and it's that's why also like the name, the Company of Ghosts, became sort of fitting. I mean, Tony didn't really know, but that was the track where I used quite a bit of the stuff that was recorded when I was feeling so bad. Like that whole ending section comes from that time, and also I used double tracking on that piece because I had 2 sets of performances of my parts for that piece, 2 complete sets of performances. So that's why in the production, like, if you pay close attention, you can hear that it's that it's double tracked. Yeah, so like maybe because I've been talking for almost 40 minutes nonstop, like if you just ask me some questions so like I can breathe for like 20 seconds or so.
Marcus,
Yes.
I do have a question. So you said you started writing on the keyboard. So I was curious, do you think it has anything to do with you starting on the keyboard when you were young before you picked up the guitar? Do you think you went back to a safe place for composing, that not necessarily safe, but something that was deep or, within you? Or do you think it had an impact that you chose that to create?
I know exactly. I can explain. It's like in this state of depression, let's say, right, of not being able to deliver what I'm supposed to deliver. The physical aspect of playing the touch guitar was just too much effort. Like just the fact to actually have to, because on the touch guitar you have to make the sound yourself with your fingers. On the keyboard, it's just like a plastic key that just triggers a sample in my laptop, right? So it was so much easier physically to actually start doing the work, and that's why. I think you might be right, because like I even when I play the touch guitar, I think in terms of a keyboard. Like I think in terms of the white keys and the black keys and stuff, right? So I have quite a bit of familiarity with the keyboard, but the main reason is the physicality of playing the guitar, which I just couldn't do.
Yeah, and I just a comment that I or an observation I have with I know several writers who have like they might have their residence, and then they have like a small separate building that they go to. It when you talked about the castle as well as the as well as the flat 5 minutes away, it does make a lot of sense that sometimes you have to get out of the daily schedule and the grind to be able to tap into that creativity. And it resonated with me because I know that's a lot of what I've heard from people who write too, that they have to isolate to tap into the creative stream.
Exactly. And Jerry, you also know very well about having kids and having the needs of kids and stuff.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for me having we had our daughter she was born in October 2019. So when COVID started, she was just like not even 6 months old, right? So and then like this whole confusion of like why do I not feel well, or why do we not feel well? Is it because we don't sleep enough? Is it it's like this new situation having the child in your life? And for me, really, and this was like a major insight, and I don't know if other parents think the same way, but for me, I really felt that a part of me, and I have to put it this way, was kind of like taken away from me when she was born. Like energetically, there was something that I gave away, and I had never done that before in my life. Like it was the first time where I was not just, thinking that I was only responsible for myself, but there was something more that happened. And I used the word confusion because it really caused confusion for me in combination with the COVID situation, because I had lost my job. I had to like reorient myself completely in that way, and at the same time learning the new life with the baby, which is not easy. So like all of this kind of like led to a lot of interesting, I think, like artistic utterances, let's say, that happened during COVID times. But they were mostly, as I said before to Christine, they were mostly improvised, right? And I think like quite profound music happened there. But in the situation like with Stickman, like I knew, okay, there's something completely different is required, so I can't just kind of like switch into that mode. And so like Tony kind of like saying, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start. That was the beginning of this new phase. And as I said, like from the very beginning, like Stickman for me was not my favorite band, like not even like my favorite kind of instrumentation. It's not something that I would choose to write for, but it's the band. It's kind of interesting that I'm like, even like when I'm hearing myself talk about this, like the kind of skepticism like I have myself about this situation and what I'm doing about it has nothing to do with the people involved. It's just purely kind of like a structural thing. And so I was so happy and so surprised how well received Tentacles was and still is, I guess. Right?
It is very different from prog noir, and I like both for different reasons. So, you talked a little bit about, how the creative process changed and all that, and prog noir came from you initially at first. But I mean, there's a lot of you in Tentacles as well. So would you say the big difference in the sound and even the fact that there's vocals and some are more kind of melodic in prog noir and a little bit less in Tentacles, a little bit less structured in that sense? What do you think caused that? Just life?
No, I think it's really because the writing is completely democratic on this material. It's the three of us, like, and I double checked, as I was preparing myself for this, I double checked there was not a single moment where anybody asked somebody else in the band to change anything. Right? It's really fascinating. Like the only like really the one comment that stood out for me, because it was a compliment, was from Tony towards me, where he says, where he's written, Markus, like again, like you're writing parts that only you can write. And that was like a very, very, very nice, that really motivated and helped when I heard that. And so like this approach that I took, as you know, like Pat and Tony already had come up with stuff. So I was the last one to contribute. So I had the responsibility, from my perspective, as like a composer and music producer, to turn it into something that was more than the sum of its parts, right? Because but since I was the last one to contribute a part, that was a lot of I don't want to say pressure, but I was really pushing myself to kind of find that special thing that kind of like turned things around and made them slightly different. Like so in the track Tentacles, for example, which for Tony was the whole thing, the whole chunk was like in 4/4, right? And then I started like just writing these things, like the very first riff is in 5, I think, and then I kind of like sort of like double and harmonize his bass melody to become the lead melody. And then there's a part in 7 that goes against Tony's 4, and then Tony goes back to the bass melody, which is his melody, and I play a completely new, different counter melody, and sort of like, like each piece each section of the piece is like really deliberately chosen and composed and sort of like with the idea of the motivic and thematic development even, right? So for example, there was one moment which like there was one thing that I declined that Tony sent at some point, because I had recorded my ideas for Danger in the Workplace, and Tony came back with a list of like where he was rearranging like the order of the sections, and that was like I said no, let's leave it the way it is, because at that point I already had a vision for how like the end result was going to be, like how like I said, the motivic development, how I was planning that, had already laid that out in my head. And Tony obviously didn't know. He couldn't hear that. It wasn't yet recorded, but I already had it in my head. So so you see, like the like this idea to kind of like with each little node that I'm adding, I do want to make things better or different or more interesting or more emotionally engaging, right? And so and the interesting thing is like this was even though it sounds like very a technical thing, right? This kind of approach to composition, but for me it's actually like the most intuitive way of working. Like some of I'm working with algorithms and generative music and stuff a lot, which is sort of like that part where I can't be intuitive. But with with Tentacles, everything was written purely on like what does it sound like, does it have the emotion I want it to have. I'm never really consciously asking myself those questions, right? So it's just like when I look back on it, somehow there are some voices in the back of my mind that are driving these decisions, right?
I have a question following on that.
Yeah.
Because you have explained a little bit of your state of mind while writing, while composing, but I'm wondering if there was ever a conversation with Pat and Tony about exactly the same situation for them, like which place were they, like emotionally or mentally, what maybe the pandemic could have influenced also what they were doing, but while composing. I don't know, see if you had that kind of conversations, or it was just like an exchange of materials and a conversation based on that, or something else.
Yeah, it's the something else. Like there was nothing, no conversation. It's just, I mean, that's kind of like the amazing thing, right? If you think about it, that like my I've been a professional musician almost all my life, okay? But I still remember the time when I had romantic thoughts or romantic ideas about how art is being made, right? Like, because obviously, like in the public, creativity is sort of like portrayed like you have a white wall and you have a beautiful man who has a bucket full of paint, and he throws paint at the wall, right? And like he's like totally free to create and blah blah blah, and like he thinks about, okay, yeah, this looks like a dog, and I could put some black here to make it look even more like a dog or whatever, right? And this is sort of like not how my kind of art, and also like Pat and Tony's kind of creation of art works. It's really totally based on mutual trust and love, and I guess, I mean, like I guess also this, like Pat used to call me the wild card, right? Like whenever he brought me into some project to do something, like he knew, okay, Markus is going to do something that nobody else is expecting. And so I guess like since we've known each other for such a long time, it was just a good starting point. And since this, like also like what is like the role of the producer in such a situation, with an EP like Tentacles, for example. And I tell you, it's hell, right? It really is, like, just keeping track of things. And like, I don't know, Tony is using WeTransfer, Pat is using like whatever, sometimes Dropbox, sometimes WeTransfer. Pat is kind of like a little bit dyslexic, so he like writes like the same, like Tentacles with an I, and then, like these things. And like, I always have to kind of like make sure I keep track of the versions, the titles, blah blah blah. Then like, it just occurred to me, like, Company of Ghosts was actually called Slinky up until the very last moment. Before the CD went to the pressing plant, it was called Slinky. And then they say, suddenly, like, everything was ready to go, and they said, oh no, like, Atlanta Snowfall needs to be called Ringtone again, because that was the original title, and Slinky wasn't a good title. I didn't know, I didn't care, it sounded okay to me, right? No, it's Slinky's not good enough. And then Tony said, okay, Company of Ghosts. And anyway, like the point I was trying to make, or like in response to what Alejandra said, it's really there's complete trust, and they kind of like know that I'm gonna do what is right. And since I'm the one who is responsible for getting it mixed and getting it mastered, like, I will also, make sure that their parts will be in the right form and format, so that everything is going to work. And
So quick request. Chuck, could you mute your microphone? We keep popping video back and forth between you and Marcus. And then Marcus, I'm really intrigued on how you did the transition from the recording to actually being in the same room and practicing and getting ready for the live shows. How did that transition go?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Brett. It wasn't easy for us, and we only had 2.5 days to rehearse at Tony's place. And so, like, I have to say, I wasn't really well prepared. Tony and Pat were better prepared than I was for this. And like I said, like in Company of Ghosts, like, I didn't even know where they were thinking the one was, or the bar. So like, we were there in the rehearsal studio, and we had to like figure out, because like in the beginning of that piece, there's like a backwards sample of what I'm playing. So Pat needs to kind of trigger that thing, and it was like on the 3 end of the first measure, or of the second measure, and then we had to figure out, okay, so where do I start out, so the sample and what they play kind of goes along with what we had recorded. And then I already said, like, on measure 2.5 of bar 7, I had to come in and stuff like that. So there was a little bit of a learning curve to transfer the songs into the live arena, even though, like, this time we didn't use that many overdubs, so it was mostly only like three parts, so drums, bass, let's say, the stick part, and the touch guitar part. But some samples. So in the rehearsal process, we also kind of like realized, okay, here we need to give Pat a little bit of a sample of what Tony played, like one measure, just one note or something, so that the piece is kind of like translated. So basically, the arrangement, and learning to play the pieces kind of like went hand in hand during those days. And I think we ended up maybe playing, like, I don't know exactly, like maybe 13 pieces during the tour were on the set list, but we had actually rehearsed over 20 pieces, which is also, you could say, is kind of like stupid. Why don't you kind of like choose the pieces and then only rehearse those? But it's kind of like a process where you need to discover kind of like what does this version of the band sound like, right? So we had to kind of like get the other pieces back. It was also very helpful to get Limber again to play the other pieces, even though they weren't in the set list. And then even like during the tour, Brett, and I think because you were there for 2 shows, there was one piece, Company of Ghosts, that we only played occasionally. Right. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does, and it fascinates me because it sounds like the recording process was kind of like the game of telephone. You kept passing pieces off to each other and building on that. Whereas when you play live, it seems so collaborative and there's such an interplay between the three of you. I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, it is, right?
I actually
So,
have a question.
Somebody else has a question. Go ahead.
I actually had a question about the collaboration process. You said that you were transferring files back and forth. I was wondering, were they just sending audio files and you had to assemble them in a digital audio workstation? And how does that work with like arranging things? Because I've tried doing that with some of my other musician friends, and it's really hard, especially if you have like different time signatures. Okay, like where does this file start? I'm just curious on how you guys work that out.
Yeah, so we've been in this for a long time, so kind of like we know how to do this, and it's very simple. You always bounce the file from the very beginning of the session. So when you slot it into the new session, you can be sure it's in the right place. And like we're all using different systems. Pat is on Pro Tools, Tony is on Logic. I'm using Ableton Live to record. So and like I'm the guy who brings everything together. So like I bring everything together in Ableton Live. And so the good thing is that the exchange of tempo map data and time signature data works with MIDI files. So sometimes, and in some cases, and I think I mentioned that already, Tony sent a tempo map, let's say, or a time signature map along with his parts. So it was kind of like easy to see where sections started and where like there was a change. In other instances, like there was nothing there of that kind. Like Tentacles, as I said, was all 4/4 all the way, right? So and then I didn't really care, kind of laying out my arrangement completely and sending like a tempo or a time signature map back to Pat. With Pat, it's easier for me to just use a few words and to just say, okay, there's this section in 17 which is subdivided into 5, 5, and 7. Like when I use that kind of language with him, it is more it's more flexible, kind of like to deal with that when you don't really have to, when you don't kind of like tell somebody, oh, this is in 7, or this is in 8, or like or anything, or even with Tony's parts, especially in Danger in the Workplace, which is like super atonal. Like there's like I've never once referenced which bass notes he's playing there. Like I didn't care which time signatures, whatever. I just had my idea for a theme and I played that theme, and I was, this goes much further than your question, Jonathan, I know, but there's sort of like a way of working that I've developed where you're basically making a decision that what you're doing is right, and then you go with it. And the decision that you make that something is right means that it is right. And it will always be right, even if it creates dissonance, right? And in Danger in the Workplace is one of these pieces where, like, yes, there were time signatures were in there, but there was like the grid for whatever tonality things may be. Like, because I remember that Tony sent in his first. Let me see that. I can show you that in the chat. Just give me a second to find that, because this is really interesting. So in the email from the 27th of December, Tony sent this. So you'll see this in the chat. Can you see this? So like the interesting thing is like I've never even looked at this when I played my parts. I didn't want to know. Yes, 16 bars, whatever. Exactly, Christine. That's funny, huh? But that's kind of like how I approach the whole thing. Like there's no, I don't know, like F minor, like I don't care, right? I'll just play whatever I want to play. In some cases, it matches up, like in the E flat sections, for example. But then even there, like within the like I'm mixing up two modes in the space of 4 notes already. Like so, it's really just kind of like you see. So this is it's interesting to me as well. But I've never really referenced it in the process of recording.
So Markus, this one you said that Tony sent you, he had a plan for the whole song, but it seems to me, I infer from what you said, that he sent you a bunch of snippets that you put together in songs. Did he send them with the intent that all these fit in the song, or he just sent you ideas that then you made into songs?
No, I mean, in the cases of the pieces that actually made it onto the EP, he had already, they were already in some kind of form, in some kind of order. Right, and I just remembered that the 16 bars whatever was empty space. There was nothing. So that's where I composed this riff. Like there's a D minor. I remember that there's a riff in D minor that is kind of like using the same modal mixture that I used in the E flat minor section, right? But as a bass part. So again, like it's really interesting because when I say this, I wasn't aware of that. Now that I kind of like look at this and I remember what did I actually do in the E flat section, what did I compose in the whatever section, that those two things are related. And that's just how my brain works, right? Like I don't even need to think about this. Like these threads, these threads, they are kind of like, the way that I explain it to myself is, and it's the same in improvisation. I have some working memory, let's say, that everything I do kind of like goes into that memory. I can access that memory at all times, and like every kind of like new decision kind of takes into account what has already happened.
So I don't want to monopolize the questions, but I have another one.
Yeah, no,
so you and Tony switch up because you can play the whole gamut, the range, and it. For example, seeing you live in Mantra, I always thought Tony was playing the bass, but it's you. And so, how do you trade? Does it just happen because again, who creates what first? But do you negotiate these things? I mean, Tony is known for the bass, and so how does that work between the two of you?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't even remember, like in cases where, like Cusp, for example, right? I think on the album, it's the bass part is it's the part that I'd written. But on the album, I can't remember. I think it was Tony who played it, and it's so even there in the Hide the Trees it's like a classic Markus riff. And it's Tony played it, right? And it's interesting. Like it's just sometimes it's like what is more convenient in the live arrangement. What does sound better? But you know, like also up until recently, I didn't really have a good solution how to switch between the lead sounds and the bass sounds. And Robert Fraser always had to compensate, and for the low frequencies. So now with my new setup, that's been taken care of. But for quite a few years, like I had to decide, okay, do I really want to change to a completely different sound here and give Robert Fraser a hard time mixing, or do we just say, okay, Tony's playing the bass throughout the whole piece and I play the lead part throughout the whole piece? So it's really I would love to do much more of the switching than we're already doing. And I don't think we do that much. Really, but I would love to do that more. Yeah,
Markus. So I want to just make a statement first. Is that you said you were in a state of not composing there, and I mean, any life change, positive or negative, can obviously have an effect on us mentally. And, obviously with the, new family and then the pandemic hitting, which that'll, either one of those alone can throw people off, right? And then you had those in combination, combined with uncertainty about work and everything else. But at the same time, you also were, I don't know, you were helping out a lot of us, with the work you were doing then, because even though you weren't composing, you were doing the Living the Dream series, and you were doing some great interviews and allowing us to participate, and quite frankly to hear and interact with some absolutely amazing musicians that most of us wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to do so. And I think we talked about that in Chicago, that there's just like people were talking like, oh my God, look who popped into this, like the John McLaughlin one, and Chick Corea, and all these folks were just in there, and it was just it was crazy. And those of us who were there were wondered, what did we do to get involved with this? That we see all these people. So so certainly like I don't know how you view that time spent when you weren't feeling like you were able to compose, but I would say that it was not wasted on with what you were doing, right? Like I from my standpoint, it was you were doing great things for the rest of us out there.
Thank you.
My question is you said a little earlier that you viewed your role in Stickmen, at least at the beginning, as just being kind of to the side and to service the performance of Pat and Tony. And I'm wondering, do you still view yourself in that way, or do you now feel? I know that the band is very egalitarian and very, everyone is considered equal, in everyone's minds as far as the band members. But do you still see yourself in that role, or do you now feel more comfortable in being equal with them on stage, in that sense?
Yeah, I think, and I don't remember exactly when that started, but we've certainly become more equal. I mean, Tony is still the eye catcher, and he should be, right? Like, and he's the reason why we have an audience. That's something I don't ever forget. Well, and you could say he is the reason, or you could say like the artists that he played with are the reason why people are coming to the shows. And then you could say, and this is kind of like a thought that I'm repeating sometimes, but like the soul record, Peter Gabriel's soul record, which was released 40 years ago, no, almost 40 years ago, I guess. Like it was a big success, maybe because some guy needed a write-off and they spent twice as much money on promotion or something. Like you never really know like who's responsible for the success or for the circumstances why you can actually be on stage with these guys, right? And so like for me, it's absolute. I'm not. There was a time when it was annoying when I was seeing like I didn't get any attention or whatever, but I'm completely over that. That was like a long time ago. No, I think there's sort of like where in the beginning I was supporting them from the bottom up, right? Like I have become the guy who's supporting them from all this, from every side. That's kind of like how I see it. And that's how I think they, maybe even if they don't have those words, but I think that's how they see it as well.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing too is that when Stickmen started out, it was Tony Levin's Stickmen, it was always billed with Tony, and so that probably brought a lot of people in. But I think we're at a point now where people go to a Stickmen show because they know Stickmen, right? Like it's not like you might still get new folks coming in because, oh hey, that's Tony Levin, I'm going to go see them. But I think you've got a fan base now for Stickmen as Stickmen, and we all love having you as part of it just as much as we love Tony being there. And let's be fair, Tony draws attention at the show because Tony's the most visible moving part. We know how Markus is. Markus stands there and plays, and so we've all seen the Markus meme of Markus's moods and everything. So it's it all applies. But I'm just glad that we're maybe getting through this and able to see you guys again, and and have some new music to boot.
Yes.
I have to agree with you, Chuck. I mean, I think people may come for Tony, but now they stay for the music because it's brilliant music and three gifted musicians that we see interact and play with each other, which is just remarkable.
You cannot use gifted, hardworking. Marcus won't like that. He's not talented. He worked hard, right?
I guess
three
so.
hard-working musicians who play brilliantly together.
Thank you.
Yeah, you see, there's like with the Tentacles, and some of you have heard the story of how the name came, but I'm just going to quickly repeat it, right? So last year I said to Tony that I was going to send him an instrument, a touch guitar, as a thank you, just as a thank you. And I also, like, because I know at that time Emma Chapman also was still alive, and I know that there's a bit of a difficult relationship between Tony and Emma Chapman also. And so I said, Tony, you don't even have to use the touch guitar. I'm just going to send it to you as a thank you for your collection. Yeah, he has many instruments. And so Tony was expecting a U8, an 8-string instrument like I play. But I had actually written to him that I'm going to send him a U10, so he just hadn't paid attention. So he had this idea to take the instrument out of the case and to record a piece right away. And he was expecting an 8-string, and he wanted to call the piece "You Ate It." That was like the joke. That's the kind of dad joke that Tony likes, right? Or is it granddad joke? I don't know. Anyway, so the piece then eventually, like we needed a title, we needed a word for that piece that has 10 in it, and that's how we arrived at Tentacles. Like utensils wasn't very good, and so that's kind of like how that happened. So, and it's so fascinating how these let's just say gestures, in this case it was actually a musical instrument, right? Like a very tangible, heavy thing that was, sent, and it kind of like becomes part of culture as like tentacles, because like then now people think of like the tentacles of an octopus or whatever, right? But then we realize, okay, but then maybe the artwork has nothing really to do with tentacles itself, but then there is something like tentacles on the artwork, right? And the artwork, and this is something I wanted to mention anyway, which is by my friend Hajo Müller, who is a German illustrator and photographer. Great guy who's been working with Steven Wilson for a long time, for, I don't know, probably way more than 10 years, I think. And he, because like, okay, we have like 2.5 weeks till we need to go to the pressing plant, and we don't have any artwork. And at that point, I had no idea what the EP was going to be called. Like, we had no idea it was going to be called Tentacles. This is like really mind-boggling if you think about it, like that image, right? And no, there was no tentacles. When I asked him to send me some work that he had not used, because I didn't have much money to pay him. I had 500 euros to give him, right? 500 euros. I said, okay, Hajo, I don't want you to actually really have much work with this. Please find something that maybe you've already done for something else that wasn't used. And so I only before the session, I opened up his original email, and I found this image, and it's the Tentacles image, and it says Blackfield 3. So it was actually a proposal for a Steven Wilson produced record, Blackfield 3, which has now become Tentacles. Isn't that mind-boggling? Isn't that strange? And like Soren's walking around in his house with a Tentacles t-shirt on, and Lloyd, I guess, also has a Tentacles t-shirt on, right? Yes, there you go. Like so, and this.
Yeah, and I want to look at the Blackfield 3 album.
Okay.
Now that you mentioned it, that's why I'm walking.
Yeah, I see.
But it's so amazing because I never realized this was Tentacles. But I went, as you know, Marcus, I was visiting my dad who just turned 95. I was wearing the shirt, but it was tucked in, so he couldn't read Tentacles. He looks at me, he's like, "What's that? It looks like a bunch of tentacles." I was like, wow, you got tentacles out of the character. I'd never, I thought it was amazing. I mean, those coincidences of all you've described is just so cool. And it's such a cool character. It's so nice.
Yeah.
And there are 10, there's like 6 on the head and two arms, 2 legs. So it does turn out to be 10.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. 6 on the head and 2 arms, 2 legs.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So and we call that little guy the 21st century hemorrhoid man.
That's great.
But this little guy doesn't even exist on its own. It's part of that image on the cover, right? So Bernhard, my friend, had to I don't know how you call it, but he had to kind of like take it out of the image and make it work as a standalone graphic. So it wasn't even intended to be used on its own, and it was so powerful. Like we actually, like going into the tour after the pandemic, we really had no idea if we were going to sell anything, if people, have money and if they want to spend it on a band. Like we didn't know, and so I don't know how many t-shirts Leonardo made, but we sold out of them, and we were going for like maybe even almost 10 shows without shirts to sell, which was quite a drag. But anyway, so like there's a lot going on, and let me just say something about I know that somebody was also asking about the production process, like technically, if you still have time, like I have reserved like 2 hours for this, like however long we're gonna be here for. But so are you guys aware what mixing is of music, right? So basically once everything is recorded, traditionally, and this is kind of interesting, because when I say traditionally, there is no such thing as one particular tradition. It's more like historically, we need to say. Like historically, up to a certain point, music was recorded the way that it was supposed to sound. Say if you had like Elvis Presley recording in the early 50s, right? They would set up the musicians in a room, and they would put one microphone into the room, and the whole band plus the singer would perform, and they would record things the way they should sound on the final master, right? So the mixing was happening as you were setting up, as you were capturing. And we've moved away from that more and more through the years, which opened a lot of like new doors for new creative approaches to recording. So in the 70s, when Mike Oldfield did the overdubbing of 100 parts in one section of a song, let's say, and stuff like that, or like obviously earlier on, like this had been like Les Paul was one of the guys. Basically, he invented this, right, Les Paul. But anyway, Brian Eno came around in the 70s, and this is an important concept that I don't know if you are aware of that. And he came up with the idea of treatments, meaning that you can take a signal and send it through, say, like a series of funnels on a board, where you have a microphone at the end of the course, let's say, picking up the sound through the last funnel, and you get like a modulated, filtered version of the original, right? And so there are ways to do acoustic treatments, acoustically, and then with effects, boxes with reverbs, whatever. You can do all sorts of treatments to create music by kind of like not wanting to be sounding natural. Like the idea is not to sound natural necessarily, but to create a piece of art, sonic art, that does not have to represent something that exists in reality, right? So with like fast forward to recording Tentacles, where we're not even in the same room, all the performances are basically, for lack of a better word, let's say dead in a way. Like there's no interaction. There's really no interaction other than the interaction that I have to say this, as the composer, as the composer of the last elements that go into the compositions, right? Like I need to kind of like create these parts that mimic the interaction between the players, and not just between the players, but also between the movement of air, right? Like the movement of air that doesn't exist between the recorded parts, because it wasn't recorded in the same physical place. So you kind of like, you, and I mean myself, I have to sort of like take that into account for the part. So also like each note, each part I'm writing has to sort of like create a vibration that interacts with what is there. And so the mixing process, as you can see now, we have like these separate tracks, and I can show you later, like these separate tracks of stuff. So we have Tony's bass, like Tony's top part of the stick. We have the drums kind of on maybe like say 6 to 8 tracks. Then we have 2 stereo tracks of electronics that Pat did. Then we have my touch guitar parts, which are sort of like sometimes recorded in chunks. Sometimes, as I said, like in Company of Ghosts, they are like double tracked. So like the question is like, what do we do with this conglomerate of things that have nothing to do with each other sonically? Right? So the mix, and this is like, I'm really grateful that, you know, I've been working with Benny Schaefer for a very long time. I kind of like I don't see myself as a mentor, but really I am kind of like a mentor for him, because I was bringing a lot of musical projects to him that he was then working on and learning with. So the mix engineer has kind of like the very difficult task of recreating the movement of air that's not there. And that is a really, really big talent. Like some people have that kind of talent. And that's also why I mentioned this concept of treatments, like what Brian Eno was doing. So say, for example, you want to have a bass drum, let's say, they go boom, 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 yeah, the kick drum, and the bass plays at the same time, but they are recorded independently, not in the same room, have nothing to do with each other. The writing, yes, they are kind of like written to go with each other, but the air movement is not there. So what do you do? So there are treatments, there are things you can do to make these elements interact dynamically. So, and I'm just not going into super technical details here, but there is like a device that's called a compressor that reacts to the level of a signal that goes into it, right? So, and when the level is like, yeah, Jonathan sidechaining, but that's not what I'm talking about. Just simple compressor, like you know, rather than just sending one instrument in it, you send 2 instruments into it. So that means whenever instrument A gets louder, the whole signal gets pushed down. That's what the compressor does. It makes it softer, right? So, but since you're sending like 2 elements through the compressor at the same time, it means that the other thing you're sending through it, when the kick drum is loud and it gets pushed down, the bass is also getting pushed down in level. And this can be like super small movements, right? Like something that our ear wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. Say it's like just like 0.2 dB or something of compression. But you have 2 instruments interacting that way, and suddenly these 2 elements that had nothing to do before, now they kind of like move in sync a little bit. Like one element, one of the 2 can have an influence on the other. And a great mixing engineer is capable of recreating this interaction of the signals across the whole band, across the whole signal path of everything. Yeah, and that's why mixing is something that I would consider it's something that you should allow time for, right? Ideally, you can have, let's say, 2-3 days to work on one piece, right? But with the Tentacles EP, I don't really know factually how much time Benny spent on it, but no more than 2.5 work days on five pieces, like that he had never heard before, that were not ideal because, as I said, there was no interaction in them. So as the mix engineer, you kind of like have to kind of find a way into the material so that any of these treatments that you're making is you want to create a certain energy, you want to create that interaction. And if you're like most engineers, they don't even understand the composition. I mean, how could they? Like, you know, if it's like 17 against 3 in like in Tentacles or something, like, you know, you don't need, and you don't need to really. I think ideally the engineer simply kind of latches onto the energy of things. And that's why, again, I have to say it was so crucial to work with somebody that I know, where it's not just about knowing that he will be able to deliver, but also where the communication when it comes to like me saying, like, Benny, no, that doesn't work, or like, and there shouldn't be any sort of preciousness, you know, there shouldn't be any preciousness with decisions or anything. If working on a tight budget and, you know, like within, like, you know, because we had to deliver. I delivered the files to Benny, the first files to Benny on Sunday, and then like the last files on Tuesday, and we had to have everything mixed on Friday, and Fabio then got the mixes on Friday and mastered over the weekend, and on Monday morning I sent everything off to the pressing plant. So that's how it went. So I needed to make sure that everything is in place, everything works smoothly. You know, like what happened to me with my laptop, you know, like that, something like that is an absolute, like, you know, I didn't, but I should have slapped myself for doing something like that, right? So yeah, it's a really wonderful process, and yeah, maybe some questions, like, again, my mouth is getting very dry here.
Yeah, Markus, did you want to? I noticed sometimes you on your projects or even Stickman, you've mixed as well too. Does it help to have one of the reasons to have another set of eyes and ears and another bit of creativity into mixing, that you give it to somebody who's outside of the compositional process?
Yeah, you know, for me, I'm very particular when it comes to that. I'm a believer in teamwork. And I know it's maybe it's a little childish, but I'd rather share. Like, if somebody wants to pay me 5,000 euro to mix their album, right, mix and master their album, I don't want to be the one who masters the album, even though I would be getting, like, say, 500 or 800 bucks more. No, I ask a friend to master it. Right? Or if I don't have the time to mix it myself, I would ask a friend and only take a percentage, right? Like, even there, I'm kind of like the person who wants to share. But when it comes to my own projects, there's always the artistic consideration, and exactly as you were saying, like, what drives me, and that kind of like has become clear, I hope. Like I said, I want my part to change everything again. Right? So if I play a note, and that goes for live performance as well, that one note that I'm playing is supposed to turn everything upside down, the whole thing that's happening, right? And I want the same during the production process. So, like, I don't want the music to sound exactly the way that I've heard it all the time while I was working on it. I want to hear it from a new perspective. I want to hear it sound better. I want to hear it sound more universally designed, let's say, for not a wider audience, but for a wider range of taste, let's say. Like, it's so, and getting other people involved in a creative process like that always, from my perspective, leads to a better product, right? A better piece of art, because there are more perspectives in it. Right?
So, Markus,
So that takes a lot of trust. And have there ever been any times where you went, "Oh my God, we can't use this," or "This is not what I wanted at all"? How do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, so because I'm going into the process with the knowledge that something like that may happen, it has never happened like that. But I have kind of like say sold my approach to other people, where I am the producer for their project, where it was really getting super difficult because the artist was so in love with what they had done that they couldn't let go, and they couldn't accept the external input, let's say, which eventually would have made it a better record, right? So, and unfortunately, I really have to say, like, some of the projects that had lots of potential that then tanked, like I worked with a couple of like famous German artists, for example, right? It tanked because they didn't let me do my work, or they didn't let the engineer that I chose do their work, right? Stuff like that. It's for me, I love the surprise, and Wolfgang is here also. Like Wolfgang and I were working on an amazing project right now, which is called Mata Atlantica, and also there was this point just a few weeks ago when I was on tour, where I was still originally thinking that I was going to mix this project, and then I realized no, no, and I talked to Wolfgang. Then I said, we need to give this to Stefano, to this Italian guy. First of all, he had not heard that stuff at all, and he's an analog guy, so he mixes on a mixing desk and stuff. So for him, it is just a way to, he sets up everything on the mixing desk and he creates the mix, and he doesn't even have time to think about problems, or like he can't even get into the mindset of not liking something, right? Like he has to intuitively create solutions without actually finding problems, if that makes any sense, right? Like so you're getting the best of somebody else into something that you have already lived into, in a world that you've already lived in for a while, where you're not exactly sure how many blind spots you're having, right? And that's why it's, for me, it's so wonderful. And I think I hope Wolfgang agrees, but like it's come out in such an amazingly surprising way that like everything that we did do actually works, where like my mindset was, there's a lot of problems we still need to solve. It turns out, like, once we gave it to Stefano and he mixed it, there was no problem, and it's wonderful, you know.
But the sort of kind of detachment you need from the creative process, that's very personal and deep. It always amazes me how you're able to let go. Do you think it's something that's really unique to you? It seems to me most creators are very attached to their ideas and the feelings they're trying to convey, or the moods and so on. It takes a different mindset, I think, than most musicians to be able to let go.
Yeah, you know, I see myself also as part of, say, like an arts movement generally. Like for me, I'm not just a musician, so I have learned that, like, I don't know, like the Russian constructivists or whatever they were called. There was a school of artists, Russian artists, who made art in a way that they transmitted coordinates through the telephone to somebody else, who was then like drawing things, or, you know, they were doing everything to make the art as impersonal as possible, right? So there in the field of art, there have been these ideas and processes to kind of like take the artist out of the equation, that those have been around forever. And for me, it's just like it's very natural. I think it's just if you're asking like about me, it's my curiosity, right? Like I do want to, I sort of still believe in magic, and I believe in the in the creativity in general, right? So for me, letting go of control in the field of music is a very, very good thing. Which does not mean that I would like accept anything, right? Like, because there certainly, like, there are some things, for example, if there's like, say, the track Tentacles again, and the bass in the verses, the bass plays the melody, right? So there, you know, as a mix engineer, you may not know that, right? So you could say, okay, I'm mixing it at the bass at a level where it's at a level where normally you would have a bass line set, but so maybe Benny did. I don't remember if this was the case in this piece, but it's an example. So then I would say to him, I would write him feedback. I would say, okay, in the verses, Benny, please turn up the bass, because here it is the lead part. So this would be my way of communicating that. So it's not that I would, and a lot of people do that, and I hate that actually when they're working with me. A lot of people get personal. They kind of like say, well, don't you realize that this needs to be louder because it's blood? No, and they wouldn't even give me a reason, right? Like, I think the communication it really is key when working in the creative arts, to really to make the best out of the situation, to get the best out of like to really create more than the sum of the parts, really.
You know, like, building on what Kristen said, in my experience with a lot of my friends are musicians, I think that part of letting go, as you call it, choosing somebody to do it, I mean, that I think is what gives the magic to the whole process as well, because you choose specifically someone to do that for you. You know, like, it's not like you're just going to go out and look for an engineer. They choose somebody especially for each project. And then I was wondering if this was a matter of opportunity, like it was available or something like that, or you thought about this person, to choose this person to do this process of mastering because it was fitting for the project, for music.
Yeah, and I think also there it's 90% about practicability, unfortunately, right? It's not really. I mean, we could have, like, I don't know, could we have gotten a better mix if we had had more time, if we had had more money? Maybe, but the you know, it's a little bit like, because I knew that there is going to be a CD, or there is going to be a download, and I knew that some people will listen to it, right? So like the recipient, the listener at the end, is the key element. And do I know what kind of sound, what kind of mix creates what kind of like emotion, or what kind of whatever? I do not know. So that's why also here I don't have much of a romantic idea about choosing the right person for the right job in terms of the musicality, let's say. It's more about the practicability. And like I said, I've worked with Benny many times, and I knew he was available, and he agreed to do it. Also, there wasn't a lot of budget, there wasn't a lot of money, so I said, okay, are you going to do it? Can you do it? And that's how it went, right? So, but that's why sometimes with some albums, I can't remember now which, sometimes I go back and I want to remix them. I want to have a new version of something. Not because I'm unhappy with the old version, but because I'm curious, which other, how different can the emotional impact be, right? So yeah, I mean, like, this is interesting. Like, also thinking about like future work I may be doing. Maybe, you know, I'm really thinking about going back and doing crowdfunding again, because it would allow me to maybe make decisions that are more based on, not on pure practicability, right? If I knew I had a budget, and I knew the budget is something where I could afford somebody who I think who may be good for. But it just, I mean, as you can see with Stickman, it wouldn't have worked at all, because it was on such a tight schedule. So I don't know. Bye, Mark. I saw your message there. Yeah, like you see, like we already talked almost 2 hours here without even looking at anything, which also I think is not really that, with like how our whole world with the YouTube world, let's say, where you can find a tutorial for anything, right? There's a lot of information out there that is good if you don't have an idea, but if you have some kind of idea, it doesn't really help. And I think most of us have run into this. Like, you read like a clickbaity headline and you think you're going to get something out of it that you don't know already, but like then after like watching like the first 5 seconds, you already know that you know everything already, right? And I want to go beyond that point, and that's also the reason why, and in this series of Living the Dream events, that's what I want to do. I want to kind of like get to the point where we get to talk about the things that are normally not being said. Yeah, Hacksaw. Hey, you need to unmute it.
Yeah. So this reminds me of a conversation I've been having with some of the campers. One of the things that I've been complaining about is that it's possible to find a billion different patches and sounds out there. It's very, very difficult to get the sound in my head, which I think is perfectly reasonable. It's not too weird, but to get that onto the page, specifically in this case, just however I need to do it, what instruments I need to do it, what synthesis, whatever it is. And I think that sort of sounds like a little like related to what you're talking about in the just trying to find a way to get at something different that's not what you're seeing out in the world.
Yeah, exactly. I think that I've said that I've been in touch with the arts world, fine arts world, with, like, my ex-wife was an artist, and I had a lot of contact with people who are just identify as artists, right? And it was very interesting to see how their education looks like. And their education does not look like anything that you can find on YouTube. It's really about being together, like you're spending time with your teacher. You are, like, as some people say, you're breathing the same air, right? That is like the fine things that you can really describe with words. Like in a musical, like in a music studio setting, that would be the intern, right? Like the famous story of people like Alan Parsons, for example, right? Like, he's sitting in the corner and brewing coffee while they're recording the Beatles, right? Like that's how you're learning this. It's not about somebody telling you a story. I mean, like, even like I said, like, I'm trying to get closer to that, but it's really there's even more to it. There is some sort of arts education that is something that is not happening in the medium of YouTube. Some people are trying it, but then you can also see it fails because they get caught up in the treadmill, let's say, of it, and they lose their initial innocence. to actually do to really kind of like to let's say to create other artists, right? So and this is something that I don't know, like I mean like I'm just looking at Wolfgang and Lloyd and Jonathan there and Aralee are students of mine, right? And I hope that you agree that that's kind of like what I'm doing. I'm giving you the space to be yourself, and like with Aralee, there's this famous sentence, what would Aralee do? That's kind of like what it is about. Like it's not about like as the teacher to kind of like tell somebody what to do. It's about helping the student to find out what they would do, or not even what they would do, but what they do. So at Hacksaw, that's how I would approach your problem, right? You just do what you do, and you keep doing what you do, but you also looking at it from a meta perspective, and you're analyzing what you're doing. And by realizing that, say, like most of the beats you come up with are in 7, let's say, right, gives you an incentive to consciously create a beat that is in 9 or whatever, something different, right? So like you're kind of like by understanding how Hacksaw does do things, you will create branches in your, you will create options in your life. You will have a chance to realize, okay, now I've used that same sentence again. So now I can correct myself. Right?
This is hilarious because, so when I worked for Robot, I was on a committee of people who were in charge of examining our processes. So I forget what the formal title was, but it was the process group. And the thing was, a big thing was write down the workflow for this process. What is the first step? What is the second step? Write it down. Doesn't matter what they are. It doesn't matter how wonky they are or whether you think step 3 is stupid. Write it down so that you can actually look at it and see what you actually have, and then how can you then optimize it? Can you make step 3 smarter? Whatever it is. But writing it down is a huge part of this. And this is actually, it's hilarious that I was on that group because I'm terrible about journaling my own stuff.
But you see, like my advice here would be that you would not try to, like the approach or the idea is not to optimize. Yeah, that would be wrong. Right?
Yeah,
like that would just be just putting you into another trap, right? What you want to do is you want to do the opposite. Say how you can ask yourself, how can I make this more complicated? Like how can I make this create more ideas? Mm-hmm. How can I and basically that means like there is no judgment. There should be no judgment. That's why I call it like a meta position. Like you're just writing things down or you're analyzing things without making any judgment. And then from there, ideas will come no matter what.
Yeah. It's interesting that I often think about preconceptions and attachments and how you get bogged down in those kinds of things because you have a preconception of, oh, this is good, this is not. And I can't remember if it was one of your things or not, but the phrase, don't be afraid of what you like, came up. And if you like something, that's okay. It doesn't matter if anybody else does. Mm-hmm. But it is always interesting to find ways to get out of your own head in terms of like, I've done this thing, how is it? Because sort of like when you're writing something that's complicated or simple and you finish writing it, one of the things I've discovered works for me is that I just wait 24 hours and I listen to it again. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, I'm detached enough from it that I can kind of go, oh yeah, that works. And weirdly, I got that piece of advice from a Stephen Sondheim documentary who basically said, if I wake up in the morning and I'm singing some enchanted evening, I take a very hard look at what I wrote last night, you know. But the other thing you were talking about teaching, it reminds me of something that they talk about in martial arts in particular, but in other places. It's just the idea of there's a certain point where you can't teach something. What you have to do is set something up so that your student has an experience. And then you say, well, what was your experience? How did you relate to that? And then they can kind of interpret that for themselves in a funny way.
But in order, and you know that, I'm saying it, like in order to go to the next step, even these beliefs that you're now telling us, they don't matter. Like, is it like, do you have to listen back to it after 24 hours or 23 hours or 48 or maybe 30 minutes? Like, what I'm trying to say is that's where the freedom is. Like, you kind of like create your tree with these beautiful branches. Like, and like there's a branch for like after 1 second, for after 1.5 seconds, after blah blah blah. Like it's totally fractured like your world, and it gives you all the options at any time. You can travel your like the tree of life, like at any speed, in any direction, anywhere, at any point. And it's the beliefs like you just said. And you know, some beliefs are great because they work, they're very good. Some are very, very bad, can be very bad and help all people back, right? But still, the truth is in the freedom to go with the flow, with like take any fork in the road. It doesn't matter, and you know that it doesn't matter if you go left or right. It doesn't matter. And I mean that in the best way possible when I say it doesn't matter, right? So and that is really like the wisdom, kind of like one of the little bit of wisdom that I have found for myself, that I've started to realize that I'm actually you know, sometimes I'm living, you know, there's like set A of principles, like there's that branch, or there's this other, and like things may be totally contradictory, but somehow the fact that, like I said, like I can compose, I can improvise, and in the end I don't even see the difference anymore, right? Like, even though like descriptively you could say, yeah, it's different, but no, it's not different, it's the same thing. And that's why Hacksaw, just do what you do and do more of it, you know, because like I said, that was the problem I had with getting the Stickman stuff going, with getting Tentacles going. Like the creativity, the ideas, everything was there. Like even the health, like a healthy critic in my head was there, but it just didn't get done. So that's why, like, if you want to do something, do it. It seems totally obvious, right? And it is, you know. So.
It's just a comment. The thing that, I mean, I brought up the listening 24 hours thing, not as that's a rule that everybody should follow, but I found that was just something that I'd heard, and I wonder if that works for me. Mm-hmm. And it does. And so it just became a useful tool. And sometimes it's 10 minutes and sometimes it is a bunch of different things. But I think also a lot of what you're talking about, at least from my point of view, comes from also knowing who I am, knowing what my strengths are, knowing what things that I maybe am good at, not good at, and being able to kind of judge that in the moment, but without getting on myself of going, oh, this is going to suck, mm-hmm. Because that allows me just to go, well, what if I just rewrite this in 5?
Yeah.
Well, try it, see what happens.
Yeah.
I think so. Some of these things sound like things that I've seen in the Brian Eno deck. Just because like that thing you're doing, do it the other way. It's it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody wants to, I mean, is there anything else that you would like to know about Tentacles?
Yes, Marcus, a quick question on this, since we're approaching the 2-hour mark, it seems apropos. How do you know when it's done?
Yeah, I just know.
When you run out of money.
No, like
You haven't listened to our podcast, Brett. I'm kind of, disappointed here because I asked that same question.
No, Pat has a good answer. Pat says it's done when it's shrink wrapped.
Yes.
Yeah. So which sounds funny, but it's kind of true. Like if you're really serious about your musical creation and you find a mistake, and at this point when you have the shrink wrap or close to the shrink wrap, it's mostly a mistake. It's not an artistic choice that you want to make to change something, right? It's just a mistake that you want to correct, and that just needs to get done when things have come to an end and you realize, yeah, something else needs to be done, then it needs to be done. And that's really the answer. I'm sorry, but there's nothing more to say than that. When it's done when the three guys have recorded their parts, then you need to mix it, you need to master it, you need to deliver it to the pressing plant, you need to deliver the artwork. That's the answer.
Yep.
Somebody else was going to ask.
So I one of the questions that I written down in the chat earlier was what was there any surprises that you ran across in the production of the thing, and like problems, technical problems that you hadn't encountered before, and what were the solutions?
Problems, I wouldn't say that we encountered problems really. It's like the track Tentacles, for example. Like I'm playing most of the bass parts on that track, the ones that are not the verses. Right? Because what Tony sent me or us originally was just a thing and the bass melody of the verses. So everything else was blank. So I actually started playing bass parts on it. So in terms of like from a production perspective, really is like how do we bring the sounds of the two guys together so that it wouldn't ever occur to somebody that it's two guys playing these parts. And I mean, the concept could be quite the opposite, that you want to make sure people know who is playing what, right? But with a track like Tentacles, we wanted to keep that, I wanted to have that homogeneity of sound there. And let me. So, for example, the coda of the track Tentacles, which is just this soundscape in A minor, I think. That is the soundscape that is in the track before already. It's just I just copied it to the end. It's the soundscape that sits under the solos, where Pat goes into kind of like a shuffly groove. So if you pay close attention, you can hear that part there. And so the only reason why that coda exists is because I listened back to that part, to that soundscape that I played, and I thought, oh man, that gives me goosebumps. It sounds so great. Do we just want to have it in the background for the solo? No, I want to hear it, right? And then I put it at the end of the piece, right? So there you go. So that's maybe, it's interesting. Like it's sometimes the problems are not that something is wrong or something is missing. Sometimes the problem is that there's too much good stuff. Right? And then the solution is like, how do I do justice to the music? How do I honor the music? And it wasn't intended that these pieces have these extended codas, like some of them have extended codas, right? It just happened because music, right? So, but like technical issues or anything, like there was nothing. It's interesting. Like we have really learned to record our instruments well. To be quite honest, like the most problematic sound to work with in a mix is the stick. So it was good to have the U10 on Tentacles because it was easy to mix. It's a matter of fact, like the stick sound is so unique, and that it's like, say you have a singer with a very, very unique voice. The fact that a voice is very unique may, in some cases, make it easy to integrate it with other sounds. Like the blending that I was talking about before, when people are singing in the same room or the band plays in the same room, the making the vocal blend is easy, but if you have it separately, it can be very, very difficult. And that is kind of like one of the issues that we've traditionally had with producing the stick in the Chapman stick in our music. So that's why, for example, on Prog Noir, we've used a lot of very creative ways. And I think there's actually an episode of Living the Dream where I'm showing with Benny, I'm showing the multi-track session for the track Prog Noir. And you see like there are like a multitude of different treatments of the bass sound, like really distorted and very low. And you're listening to that track, for example, the bass is so fucking loud. It's like it wouldn't technically, like any engineer who would listen to that track from a technical perspective would say the bass is way too loud. But no, if you listen to it as from an artistic statement, it's exactly the way it needs to be, right? And so that is sort of like the kind of problem that we're dealing with when mixing. But Benny did such an amazing job here. I think it really came out great.
That's fun.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I had a quick question. When you were talking about the Prog Noir CD, you had a chance to do some creative noodling at the mix level. Did you get a chance to do that again for this, or if you did it just happen before you sent it off to be mixed?
Yeah, we had one chance of giving feedback to Benny. So Benny was making the mixes and send us versions. Tony really doesn't get involved in that process. He only said something like on Tentacles because like there's the vocal that says how many strings does it have, and he wanted that line to be louder in the mix, but that's all he said. Like he really just doesn't have much of he doesn't enjoy that part of the process. But Pat and I, that's like where we excel, and Pat in particular, he's like a master listener. Like even though his hearing is so bad, but you can really trust on his feedback. Like when he says that something isn't right, he's mostly right. And like the thing is, like he also usually knows what the problem is. So I think, and this is like, and I can't remember exactly, but there was one, I think it was actually Tentacles, the track Tentacles, where he made a remark about turning something up or down, which we failed to do, which actually then came up as we were learning the pieces. And Pat was playing his part, and Tony reacted negatively to a part that Pat was playing. It was actually the part as it is on the record, but it was balanced in a different way, so that it hadn't registered with Tony as that part, and it led to some confusion where Pat had to get creative because it was sort of like a polka kind of groove that in the mix that Benny made is sort of disguised a little bit. And so yes, like this is like an instance where and Pat then told me later, he said, Markus, I sent you that email where I asked you to turn this up and you didn't. And yeah, I said mea culpa, right? But there was also like not enough time to get everything perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess my question was more like, because you talked to the Prog R stuff during the mix phase, you did some creative performances with effects and stuff, and I didn't know if you had a chance to do that.
Benny did some of that. It's part of the process of how he works. Yeah, but it's on this record. It's mostly on the drums. Like what we do is like we reamp the kick and the snare in creative ways with distortion devices. And then it's the same idea like of creating that moving air, that things are like moving together. And Benny did that on this, but not as extensively as we would do it normally, right? So for example, we've maybe only 2 or 3 weeks before finishing Tentacles, I was visiting Benny in Hanover, and we were working on the Fractal Sextet, which is a version, it's an album in the series of Fractal guitar releases that Stefan Taylor is doing. And there we spent a whole day reamping signals for 5 tracks. So it's really like a big part of how we produce. Yeah.
I'm curious, Markus. Is there any Stickman song that starts with the Pat's drum?
That's a good question. I really don't think so. I know that over the years, Pat has sent us ideas, but they haven't gotten used yet. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there is something, maybe in the first incarnation of the band, but I don't think so. It's really interesting because Pat has a very, as you know, very distinct and very artistic approach. So he would not really get influenced much by suggestions that Tony and I would make. So sometimes rather than using a click track to record a part, Tony would use a drum loop. So he would pull a drum loop and then play his part, and he would send the drum loop along with his parts to Pat. And you can always tell that like Pat kind of like almost immediately kind of erases that thing and that idea and replaces it with something way better and very, very different. Yeah. So I think it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of good that it's the order that of Tony, Pat, and I. It kind of like works very, very well to work that way. Yeah. So, and since I wasn't writing, I had prepared like lots of folders with different ideas for the Stickman album, and before it was Tentacles, and I have some folders that have some videos that Pat sent me over the years with some where he filmed himself playing something in his rehearsal room, just with the iPhone, and I was planning on just taking one of those clips and then writing something to it, but as you know, I wasn't writing much, so that's why that didn't happen.
So what's next for you and Stickman?
Well, I really do hope that we get to do more writing this year. I have already asked them, I've already written to Tony. Both, Pat's stepson is getting married today, and Tony's daughter is getting married today. So they are both very busy, have been very busy in the last few weeks. And so, I will ask again this coming week if we can get back into writing. There's going to be quite a few tours. Japan in July, it's just going to be a week, and then we're doing the camp in August. Going to be back in the U.S. and Central America in October, and in South America in November. Those are the plans. But and maybe some of you have ideas for this. So we do want to have like a proper album as well. So not just like 30 minutes of music. So like my idea was just to write more songs and then like just release a full album which kind of also features the same music that was in Tentacles. But for some reason Tony didn't feel comfortable with that. So what he's thinking now that we're gonna make another EP. So maybe there's gonna be like a second 30 to 40 minutes of completely new music again. And then maybe some idea to sell them as a box set or something, or turn them into, I don't know, right? 11 Tackles, yeah. Very good, Chuck.
Or, you know, I don't know, sushi, thinking of Japan.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, there, you know, as I said at the beginning, there are so many different angles. I kind of like chose the emotional one, and I think we got to talk quite a bit about the composition, the technical side, a little bit. Maybe at some point I can do another session where I actually like show how something was getting mixed or something. Like, I'm still interested in showing that side of things as well, but it just didn't happen today. Even though, like here, if I look at my screen, like here is this is Tentacles version 3. Right? So, this is something like maybe to wrap things up. So, like I said that at the very beginning, that it's like keeping, like trying to be a flea keeper, like all the files that are coming in. Right, like there is, it's crazy, and like these versions, then Pat would send me like a mix down as an MP3 of just like 4 measures of the song, and to listen to and to give him feedback and stuff like that. And so I have at some point I have stopped, you know, trying to be too anal retentive about archiving everything, and I just, you know, like I'm just like I was talking about the creative process where things get lost along the way, right? Like ideas get lost along the way, and versions of the songs get lost along the way. I think it's kind of important and healthy that we're not trying to remember everything, right? I think, like, again, my friend Bernhard and I, we're jokingly saying, like, I'm the person who's very good at forgetting the things that are not important. Well, Bernhard says, like, he has a big problem because he remembers fucking everything, he says. And all the unimportant things are clogging up his mind, he says, right? So, and it's the same with the creative process. Like like the tree of life we're talking about. No, it doesn't matter if you take branch A or branch B. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't even matter if you roll a die to decide which branch you take. You don't even need to decide for yourself. It doesn't matter, because like at the next fork, like it's not we can't go back anyway. Like it's just we go forward, and that's what the creative process is like for me, and that's why it's okay to forget stuff. So that's why I couldn't give you, like, if I showed you even like my sessions here, and you would ask me what did the song sound like when it was version 2, like maybe I'll find a mix down and we could listen to it, maybe not. Like, and as I said, I've been using the MIDI keyboard to record stuff, right? So in the first versions of the sessions, there was the MIDI data of stuff that I had played, so the recorded key presses, right? But then at some point in the process where I said, okay, now I'm committing to this part, I'm getting rid of the MIDI file. It's not there anymore. So sometimes I'm just deleting everything. I'm just not even keeping the session. In some cases, I'm just dragging the session into a folder called backup, and so it may be possible to recreate some of the earlier versions, but it's not that important. You know? It's really about the process. Hey, thank you so much. It was great to be back doing this. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say, or give me a hug or something?
Thank you.
Thank you. Big hug. I like this. Isn't that a bit aggressive.
It looks like a lot of tentacles. Yeah.
Tentacles, a bunch of
Tentacles.
Yeah, dump.
Thank you, Marcus. It was great.
Welcome.
Thanks for
Yeah,
sharing.
thanks.
See you
Have
soon.
all the fun you can.
Okay. Bye bye for now.